Hey everybody, welcome to another SaaS Founder Show, where we have fascinating conversations with successful SaaS founders and hear all about their journey along the way. So excited to be here. I'm Tony Zayas, joined by Andy Helko. Andy,
hey Tony, how are you doing, Tony?
I'm good. It's kind of chilly in my house here, so I got a jacket on and got my green for St. Patty's Day underneath, but
how much beer have you drank?
Oh, start a little earlier than usual to celebrate the holiday. But
understandable.
Yeah.
So what do we have going on today? What's our show?
Yeah, we got a good one here. So we have Fatima Kamatova from Veer AI. She's the co-founder and CEO, and they're a marketing AI startup that's aimed to help retailers with their targeted marketing. So pretty cool stuff. Let me bring Fatima on. Hey, Fatima, how are you?
Hi, Tony. Hi, Andy. How are you guys doing?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for taking the time out to spend it with us here today. So I guess I would say, just to get started, tell us a bit about Veer AI. We'd love to hear, and we'll dive into the story, but tell us about the platform.
Yeah, so we are a marketing SaaS startup. Our whole mission is to be able to help retailers do a lot of those things that large retailers like Amazon do all the time at a fraction of a cost. So we all know how much Amazon looks into all of our data, right? Like what we shop, how we shop. We get recommendation emails from them all the time. And if you're anything like me and you've shopped online and you've shopped on Amazon before, you probably have seen those emails where they're like, oh, we think you would like these products. So our mission is to give that ability to companies of all sizes, no matter how many millions of dollars they spend on investment on their AI talent and investment and things like this.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about the origin story. How did you, get into this? What were you doing before, and then what was that pivotal moment to look at starting?
Yeah, so I've been in this space for a while. I started my career as an investment banker, and I really didn't like it. Like it was funny because I think I liked it, but I liked it for the wrong reasons. And when I realized what I actually liked about it were the things that had to do with data and with analysis and everything else. And I just didn't like the business aspect of it, or what I guess it represented that much. So I ended up thinking about back to what my strengths were. And I always loved numbers. I did math and economics, and I also did languages during my undergrad at the University of Toronto. And I was looking at all of these things and thinking about what could that be that has somehow lies at the intersection of all of it. And that's how I read this article that a lot of people who were in data science pretty early on, when that term was even coined, which was the HBR article on the data scientist is the sexiest profession of the 21st century. And I was just reading about what it was, and I was just this sounds exactly like all the things that I love about working and I love during school and all of that stuff. And I was just how can I become one? And then I at the time was living in Europe, and I was looking into doing my master's or something like this. And then I found out that Schulich School of Business back in Toronto had this program that basically taught you how to be a data scientist. So I decided to apply, and I got in, and I loved my time there. While I was I think my week 4, I was hired by Deloitte's what's now known as Omnia AI, their artificial intelligence team. Back then, it was called something else. They've rebranded 10 times in the last 8 years. And I was hired right away. I started while I was still in school and doing my graduate thesis papers and things like this, and loved it. I was working in combination of marketing and data. And that was a lot of the analytics, a lot of those machine learning driven algorithms and things like this. I ended up going to a smaller shop just to specialize a little bit more in those things afterwards. Eventually, like at some point, I think I always had that idea that I wanted to have my own company. I wanted to work at I wanted to be a founder of a startup. So at the same time, I loved my job. Like I was always one of those people who like showed up anywhere. Just like, I love what I do. Like I think it's exciting. I like was very excited to go to work every day. Eventually, I worked at a few startups and like things like this. And at some point, I realized that like everything that I've done so far was always done for these like bigger companies, and it wasn't scalable and like things like this, which made me think about like what does it take to build a scalable product, and do I have what it takes to build one? Do I know the people who can do it with me, who would be so excited about this vision and everything else that we had? And we wanted to like not only service, like just like Fortune 500 companies, which were primarily my clients throughout the years, like the biggest banks, the biggest retail companies and things like this, but also like how do you bring it and like level the field between those who are smaller versus, like the giants of the industry.
Very cool. So when did you have the realization that this was, what you've launched with Veer AI, that was something that, was needed out there and that you knew you could bring it to the market?
I think when we launched, like we didn't know what to do. Like we had so many different ideas. And I think that's pretty common for startups to like pivot and to have those ideas change and like everything else, and like from what you were doing originally to what you end up doing and like things like this. But one of the realizations that like it was needed was when we started talking to companies, and companies were just willing to give us their data because they were like, you know what, you're doing something interesting, and you have experience and you know your stuff. Like here's our data, figure it out. And we were just like looking like my first reaction was just like, oh my God, because like I've only worked with like large corporations before, and like having that moment with them just like trusting you with their data and being like, here, when like at a like large, like I don't know, like I never worked with Walmart, but let's just put it this way, like with the Walmarts of the world, like for them to give you anything, it will take like, you have to jump through like all those hoops and do like all those things and like sign so many like confidentiality agreements and like everything else. And there's just like these companies who are like, we want to like get whatever knowledge you have. So like, here's our data, do something with it. Like, that's pretty much, I think, was the first time when we were like, okay, I think we're onto something here.
What did the product look like back then? Was it more of a manual thing? I mean, we just talked to a founder that talked about how their initial product was really just people doing stuff, or did you have a set product, and what did it look like in the beginning?
So at the very beginning, we just like gave them like, it was pretty much people doing stuff. It was me. It was people who, like a few more people who worked on tech as well, who were like amazing, absolutely amazing at what they're doing. Like it was just us doing like, pivot tables in Excel sometimes. And like after doing some analysis and like just sort of like very similar to the way the brainstorming process phase would happen at a consulting company during like a consulting project.
Right.
We'll just like do like a lot of back and forth and be like, does this make sense? Like, what will, like, if we do something like this, would this be interesting? So like, I think a lot of the first few months were like a lot of that back and forth with like figuring out how the data works, how like all of those processes work, because like, let's face it, like data work in general isn't easy, and it isn't something that is done fast, because you need to build a customer data platform. It's not something that you can, operate on Excel and like having like the front and like no, that's just like, it's not how it would work. And like, because of that, we had to do so much of that extra thinking in that phase, and like being able to like go back and forth with the clients on like what that final vision would look like. So yeah, definitely a lot of like, we use the Google Data Studios as well to like build our initial dashboards, because before we got like, the designer and the front end people and like being able to actually build the product, it's day and night.
What was that product planning process like? You said, I mean, so many founders, they have so many ideas and there's a lot going on. How did you guys think about what that first product would look like and features, and how'd you prioritize different elements?
So we went with a very open mindset that things will change. it's sort of how we decided that we will not be the type of startup that is just completely so married to their idea they don't want to adapt it to the customer needs. So in that way, like our product changed a lot from like the initial brainstorms and like what we wanted to do initially, even what we've talked to initially to the companies when we were doing, like customer discovery interviews are so key, by the way. Like a lot of, I find that like after initial ideas, sometimes people stop doing them. And like what I've realized within this journey, and we're only a year and a half old, is that you need to keep doing them all the time. But one of those things was just like the way we planned the product was just getting the feedback. Every time we got feedback, we were like, okay, that makes sense. Like what if this would look something like this instead? But also like keeping that overall vision was really important, because I think that you can't just like build everything that the client says that they want, because you don't necessarily, you can't necessarily do it as a startup. So you need to keep the vision and like build the most important parts, which is what we sort of did, because some features, like we knew that without those features, we can't launch our pilots, we can't launch the MVP, we can't do these things. And like for us to get there was like the most important part.
I'm curious about the customer interview, because I think founders and startups struggle with that. How did you go about that? Like, where did you find people to talk to, and how did you know what to ask them or talk about?
So it's a great question, because at first I was just like completely lost in the whole thing. I think the very first thing that I did, I posted on my Instagram. I didn't even post it on LinkedIn, because I was just like, I was feeling too embarrassed to do it, because I was just like, I feel like such a scam at first, like to like start doing something like this when you don't know what you're doing and how you're doing it. I read, there's this organization in Toronto called Mars, and Mars has like a lot of those different toolkits for startups, for people who want to start a company. And I ended up doing one of their it costed like $40. They have like this online course. So like if you want to like entrepreneurship 101, I think, and they talked there and they gave you like the interview guides of like how approximately to build out your customer discovery interviews. So I took that, I built out the questions, and then was just like, who am I asking these questions to? So I ended up posting on my Instagram saying that like, hi, like, do you know anyone at all who uses Shopify for their like e-commerce? Can you please talk to like can you please introduce me to them? And like I promise that like I will not be annoying. I'll ask some questions. They can end it whenever they want to, and like things like this. And I think I've gotten like 4 or 5 suggestions out of it, with people saying that, oh, I know someone, and then someone else was just like, oh, I know someone else. And that's how I started talking originally to these people. And I was just like hi, like this is what I'm doing. What I found was amazing is that in Toronto itself, like the startup community is so tight, and like a lot of the Shopify store owners operate their stores like startups. So they're very tech forward, and they're very they're the type of people who are the first adopters and things like this. So they were extremely excited to give their time, to give their data in order to build something new, to help someone who's local and things like this. And I very much appreciated all of their efforts in that respect. So yeah, those are the first ones.
How did you, you said when you first, posted, trying to get that feedback, kind of felt like, you're stepping out and doing something, did you have a little bit of sense of imposter syndrome when you were getting started, and how did you deal with that?
I think that it's common to have the imposter syndrome when you're doing something new and you don't know exactly what you're doing. So I feel like all of these things that you're doing, whenever you're dealing every day, running a startup, you're in a way pushing yourself a little bit more into that uncertainty and a little bit more out of that comfort zone and everything else. So I feel like it wasn't it was such a small step. And I think because I did it on my private Instagram account where I only have maybe 500 people that I know, half of them is family. It's and things like this, and close friends, childhood friends, and things like this, consider them family. So I feel like it was the safest way I could do it. I think the first time I posted something on LinkedIn about my startup was when I got like really scared about it. It was actually, it felt a lot more of an imposter syndrome at that moment than it did when we were doing everything else. But yeah, like it was a little bit of like just like trying to do it day by day and like step by step. And like whenever I feel whenever I feel not that confident in something, I think it's like super important for me to break it down in like smaller steps. And you're saying like, you know what, like I'm not gonna do the whole thing. I'm just gonna do this post and that's it. And then you're saying, okay, I'm going to, and this is how I did everything from like our first like Instagram post. It was just like, you know what, like I'm not gonna hire a social media person. I'm just gonna get someone who I know to like build a few visuals for us. And now I'm going to just post one thing of those posts. And then I posted another thing of those posts. And that's sort of like how it like ended up rolling.
What did that early stage look and feel like for you as you were getting first customers? You know, was it really stressful? You know, I like to think about not just, you know, what did you do, but how did you feel going through it? So that first 6 months of starting this business, you know, what were you doing, but how did you feel about it?
I think, so first 6 months of our business coincided with the beginning of like the end of the first 6 months coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. So that by itself added so much stress. I think like a year ago, I was sitting in my house and was thinking that like, why am I doing this? We've had some, so we were bootstrapped. We bootstrapped the whole time. We got some grants from the Canadian government. We didn't take any funding. We had some offers and we had some companies that are still interested in giving us some money in the future. But we sort of wanted to like, just make sure we know what we're doing first type of thing. And like, as a result, having like a higher, like a little bit, like I was worried a little bit about dilution, but on March like 17th, 2020, I was worried about the fact that like, how am I going to do this? Because I shouldn't have been worried about dilution, something like this. And we had so many, because like we were still figuring out in early stages, we were doing these initial conversations with those Shopify based companies, Shopify using companies, but we also were doing some work with some bigger but more independent brands, and some of them are pretty well known in like Europe and like things like this. And we like who actually were paying us money to do that work. And like a year ago, they've canceled all of these projects, and all of that money that we were supposed to get was suddenly off the table. And I was looking at all of this and I was just thinking like, oh my God, like this is scary. This is so scary. Like, do I need a job? like will I be able to survive like the next year? And like things like this. I even like, I think panicking, applied for one job. I didn't end up going for it because like things so thankfully stabilized a little bit. Like thanks to the Canadian government, we got a number of grants that actually helped us support some of that. One of those paid pilots with European companies actually came through, and they ended up even paying us money. So like I was just like, it wasn't as bad as it probably could have been. And like things worked out, but it was like, it definitely was a roller coaster of like, I don't know where the money is coming from and how do I support this? How do I make payroll? And like things like this was a little bit crazy.
Yeah, that early stage can be, you know, scary for everybody. And I've heard similar stories, and, you know, whether it's a pandemic or not, I mean, it's just always a little bit of a roller coaster. So you mentioned a team, and you talk about us. So what's the team look like, and where did they come on into the business?
Yeah, so we have an amazing team. We've got a great CTO who has amazing experiences of being a lead data scientist at Amazon, and him and I actually worked together before. Our head of product is also the person that we've worked like. In a way, I think I've worked with like everyone who's more or less senior in our team, like we've worked with or like studied before. So like we've known each other for many years, and it just happened that our everything that we were interested in sort of coincided professionally. And in a way, we've always wanted to work together as well. Like we enjoyed working together in the past, and we like some of the people that I'm working with here, like I've worked with at like 3 companies before, like things. So this is like a long-term like relationship almost type of thing, the partnership, where we know how everyone works, what everyone is expecting, and things like this. So this was an amazing, in that sense, like this works out so good because we all know each other's working styles, and we all work together. We also have a few great junior employees who are amazing, and who we've gotten through, like, who just graduated from some of their universities and like things like this, and are just helping out in every way that they can. And that's also great. Like we are taking advantage of like everything that we can. Like we've got a co-op student who's already this is her 2nd term with us, and we want her to come back as well. Like already, like she's great. Like I think that it's very important to have amazing people you're doing things with, because when it's a startup and things like this, and people have to wear multiple hats, and things sometimes go wrong, and things sometimes go amazing, sometimes they go wrong. Like the team is what I think makes it. And having those people around definitely helped us go through, like, whether that was like, the pandemic and no one knew what was happening and what we were doing, or like when things are like, first pilots, like let's work a little bit overtime to make sure that these things happen.
Where did you, or how did you go about finding those team members, especially like the junior team members? Because you mentioned most of the senior people you had relationships, which is awesome. But how did you go about finding the people in the more junior roles?
Yeah, so there are a few. We got. I think we got lucky. I think that like anyone who builds like you obviously, like if you build a business, anything, career, anything like this, there's obviously a good amount of like hard work that needs to go into it, but it's also being in the right place at the right time. The one interesting thing that happened with the pandemic is that a lot of the students and recent graduates ended up jobless, and their offers were canceled. Their jobs just didn't happen. Some of those firms went bankrupt and like things like this. So what happened was that we sort of, at that time, we're looking at ways of like getting some help. And we posted a job posting, I think, on like University of Waterloo's website, and some like University of Toronto websites as well. And we got overwhelmed because like it was 3 of us back then, and we got hundreds and hundreds of applications for every job that we posted, full of these kids. And I was just looking at those resumes, and I was shocked because it's just like, I didn't like, they worked at like Google, and they worked at Tesla, and they worked at all of those, and they had those amazing accomplishments. And all of them wanted to work with us because they wanted any job, to be honest, at that point, because they were just it was such a bad time for them. At the same time, we were like slightly overwhelmed with how much interest we've gotten and like everything. So we got some amazing talent out of that, because they just like, it was a great way for us to get someone actually like, because like they had, all of them had like jobs lined up, and they ended up going with us because like the only reason we even got them so fast and so like quickly was because they had their jobs lined up, and then those jobs disappeared. And I think that like was like just like a crazy coincidence, and like how great those people are. Like it's amazing. I would have hired them all back in like blink of an eye. Like they were all students. It's combination of the network. I feel like the network is always key with like things like startups and things like this, because it's not like you have a lot of budget to, like hire a dedicated recruiter. So you end up going in and saying on your LinkedIn, like, look, I'm looking for someone with these skills. Do you know anyone? The other way that we found some of the people were just like we are part of like a few accelerators in Canada. And one of them, like, they all have job boards. So a lot of the people just say, look, I know someone great. They worked for me. Like, we don't have the budget for them anymore. If you want someone, here's their resume, and like things like this. And they even like, because it's someone who was vetted and like things like this by someone who's your peer, it makes it a little bit easier to hire them as well.
Yeah, that's great. Shifting gears a little bit. So how have you gone about gaining clients?
Yeah, so everything so far has been completely organic for us. We're actually figuring this out. As I said, like we're very early stage. We're literally a year and a half, a year and a half old. I'm sorry. So we're doing this now. The whole thing about like, okay, like we've got a lot of leads who are the introductions, the referrals, things like this. I'm so sorry. And now we're.
You're fine.
I don't know. I think I need to breathe out.
Yeah, and we've heard, that's the interesting thing that I've found is that, how that path, like we've had a lot of our founders start out and they had to really like hit the pavement and look and find for those first customers. And then it transitions into organic where people are finding them, versus others really try and start out and like put out a lot of marketing. And they're never really that, feet to the ground type of company. So there's definitely a lot of different ways that organizations start when they're trying to find stuff like that.
And definitely, like, I think that it's important to have all kinds of channels. So we were doing a lot of organic stuff. And one of the things that we did early on was we realized that there's like a big lack of educational component to what we do. So we started doing retention marketing webinars where we explain how do you use data to make sure that your customers actually come back to you and like things like this. And those were extremely well attended. We had both companies, small and big, who were interested in us and in what we do. And in those webinars themselves to help them understand how do they build those long-standing customer relationships that are very like data-driven and data-oriented instead of having, the guesswork in there. So that was one of the things that we found, like that educational component that was great and like very useful. We have another one, if there's anyone listening who's interested, we have another one coming up in 2 weeks on March 30th. It's at 1 p.m. You can contact someone from our team or on LinkedIn and they will greatly send you an invite for that. They will definitely send you an invite for that. We do that. One of the other things, like we're actually just building out a lot of the things. So like we're downloading and like I'm basically building out like with our team, our HubSpot right now and things like this and doing the leads. And it's something that we haven't done before. And it's one of those, as a startup, you always do new things every single day. And it's one of the new things on my bucket list for the next few weeks.
Now, did you narrow down your target audience? Was there, because I think as founders, we look at, all these different people we can do business with, and sometimes that can dilute what we're doing. How did you determine who exactly is the best customer for your product?
Yeah, so I think that that's incredibly important because if you're reaching out to wrong people, you're not getting the response that you need. You need to be reaching out to the people who are appropriate for you as a company at the stage that you're at. And if you're making it too wide, then the product will be too wide. And like, it's just difficult to get clients and to get like long lasting relationships that way. So the one thing that we did was like, when we were doing those customer discovery interviews, and we've interviewed people who had, like from like as small as like only making like maybe $4,000 or $5,000 on their Shopify accounts, all the way through companies that make like 9 digits a year annually and like things like this. And we like saw that there was obviously such a huge difference in how they've operated. Interestingly enough, even like if you narrow it down, like I found that Shopify companies could operate very differently as well. Like some people are not making like as much money as like, I've seen $100 million companies that that make $100 million a year that operate more similar to the ones who are like making $1 or $2 million. And then like vice versa, I've also seen like companies that are $20 million, like making $20 to $30 million a year. And then they operate the way like, the large retail enterprise would in like some of the ways that they have their own data science departments, which is definitely not someone we're going for. So for us, like what we did, when we were narrowing it down, we were realizing like if this product was useful for someone, like what do they need to look like? And that was like one of the things is like, well, they shouldn't have their own big data science team, because if they do, or data analysis team, because if they do, what we do is not necessarily not useless, but probably not something that they want to be spending money on, because they already have talent to do those things.
Right.
House anyway. And like we were looking at that, and then the other thing that we realized is that if the company is very heavily in the acquisition stage of their business and not as much in the retention, it just didn't resonate with them, because that wasn't the priority for them either. So that was the thing. And then we looked at and that basically cancels out a lot of the people on the lower end in terms of the revenue as a result, because they're just very heavily focused on growing their Instagram and Facebook profiles so that they can get a lot more new customers in and doing their Facebook ads and Google ads and all of those things. Whereas the companies that we were interested in were the ones who had those completely automated already, and they have the time to build new things, to build slightly more sophisticated things behind the scenes to support their business.
I'm kind of curious, at a year and a half in, how much more do you think you need to continue to learn and hone that target audience and who you really want to, bring in as the best customers for the business?
I think we learn all the time these things. I feel like it's a never-ending process. I honestly think that it should be a process that every company always undertakes, because that's exactly how some companies go out of business, because they get too comfortable with their customers and with what they do, and they do not think how the world around them is changing and how their customers are changing and their needs are changing as well.
Yeah, get comfortable in their assumptions, which are not necessarily true.
Exactly.
Fatima, I was going to ask, so as a founder, who do you lean on to ask questions, bounce ideas, get suggestions? As you're always learning and you're dealing with all different types of challenges as you progress. What does your network look like in that regard?
Definitely. It's a great question. I think one of the first things that I do, it depends on the type of question. Everything product-wise and customers-wise, we first discuss with the team. And that's a very important thing. We just talk about this and see if anyone has any ideas. If it's something that I might not see and something that someone else sees, I think it's important to resolve it internally first. The other things, I have some great mentors. Some of them run their own SaaS startups and things like this. And they're 4 years, 5 years ahead of us in terms of the funding. They've raised, some of them raised their Series A, some of them already have raised their Series B, and they have that vast experience of telling, things like, these are the lawyers that you want to call if you have these type of issues. These are the accountants that you want because they do X, Y, and Z, and they will help you with this and that, because those are the things that you probably aren't anticipating now, but they will happen down the line. And they're in terms of those strategic and tactical decisions, I find that those people are the best, because they know it, they've done it, they know even things down to oh my God, there's this investor, you need to talk to them. And calling things like this and doing things like this, it was just incredible. And having them in my court was so useful, even to the point of I was very nervous before my first pitch on stage, while those were a thing, back when those were a thing. And one of my mentors literally she was just okay, give me a call. And I gave her a call. She was pitch me, do it right now. And I did it. And she was just okay, this is too long. You need to shorten it. You need to add a point this in there. At first, you need to have she was just send me your script and I will change it. So I did that. I sent her the script. She changed that. As a result, the next day I pitched on stage and everything else. It went great. We had some I still talk to some of the VC companies that I've met that day and everything. And it was just a really good experience that was that good because of this person's help. And I think that that's why I also do the same thing. I try to give back as much as possible. I talk to founders all the time. I have when they call me and ask me for some advice for the things that I know how to do, I'm happy to always give feedback to help navigate certain things and things like that. I think entrepreneurship can feel lonely, especially if you're the one who's responsible for a lot of those business admin and legal decisions. And having that network of people who you can rely on is one of the things that I very much both take pride in, that we have people like this, and also try to participate and give back as much as possible.
That's great.
What's been the biggest challenge that you think you've faced so far in the business?
I do think that it was the pandemic. I think that it just screwed up a lot of things. Given that we are a SaaS business who primarily services, well, not primarily, who only services retail companies, and retail businesses being affected by the lockdowns and things like this was a great, it just created a lot of this additional mess. It's will retail, how will retail look, right? what will happen to it? And because retailers themselves were just so stressed out when those things were happening. It's will supply chain break? What if my manufacturers can't operate? What if they can't ship stuff? What if the shipping companies fail? And then you have this domino effect of never-ending anxiety about the retail industry when the pandemic happened and the pandemic hit and everything else. And it was just and then it went, when we started going into the second wave and the second the stage of lockdowns, and we were launching our product at the same time, and it was just a big mess because everyone was just we don't have time. We need to spend time on figuring out how we're going to be delivering Christmas and doing Black Friday when it's completely online and we can't open our stores. And that was a whole new set of problems and issues that we had to deal and navigate, and being able to accommodate and actually switch gears a little bit and go into a little bit more of the supportive and educational content, and a little bit less on sales and a little bit less on pushing yes, you need this software right now. No, you don't need this software right now. You need to figure out your problems first. You need to stay in business, and then we can do our software to help you grow that business even more. So I think being able to be empathetic in that situation, but in general, the biggest hurdle was COVID.
So that's how you overcame that challenge, is really, like you said, being more on the empathetic side and focusing on education rather than the hard sale at that moment, even though you may have, really needed to drive sales to try and, get your company going.
Exactly. And it was just something that was also the advice that I was given. I sort of had that feeling as well, that and I talked to other startup owners who were selling to retail, but they were also selling like me on the software side of things rather than helping their, the supply chain and logistics and fulfillment happen. And everyone who I knew took a step back at that time. And it felt like a logical decision, not just a logical decision, it also felt like the best decision at that time, is you don't want to be pestering someone about something that they do not care at that particular moment, when that their first and foremost priority is to stay in business.
Yeah. What about going forward challenges? I'm always interested. What do you see over the next year as a big hurdle or challenge for the business?
I think in general, scalability is an interesting one for all of the SaaS businesses, because you want to be growing at a pace that makes sense. And you also need to accommodate everything else, from the software to other things. So one of the things that we're working on internally is being able to expand that, how many clients we can have, and things like this, to make sure that our software doesn't fail when we, onboard it. If we onboard 10th, 15th, 20th client and things like this. So that's a big one. And then how do you accommodate for that scalability from the business perspective as well? Because you have to actually have people that make sales, and then you have to have we'll have to hire a customer success person, because at the moment, everyone wears a little bit of a customer success hat, but how does it look in half a year? That should be very different, because we will be scaling.
So what would you say are the big plans over the next year that you guys have plotted out?
The big plans is to get as many clients as possible, while keeping the growth to both sustainable levels, and at the same time being able to give the best results we can to our clients. Like we want them to use the product and to know that they're actually moving forward with it, that their business is moving forward with it, and then they're better for it.
Into more of a focus on marketing?
Yeah, definitely. Like more focus on sales and marketing and being able to like just accommodate the number of clients that we're looking for.
And what has been your approach? Like what has been some of the marketing tactics and channels that you focused on?
Well, one of the greatest one for us, which we're exploring more and more, like we're so new in all of these things as well, right? So like one of the ones that we're looking at is being able to, and which was great, to partner with other organizations that have those companies as members, like our clients, our target clientele as members, and being able to offer like things like webinars and educational materials, free consultations on the state of their data and the state of their data-driven marketing and things like this to those clients. So like we've got a bunch of calls coming up with a few of these organizations where we discuss what would make most sense for their members and how can we deliver that and what would that look like, and like things like this, and being able to do that. Like the one that we have coming up is with a fashion zone in Toronto, which is an incubator specifically designed and tailored for the fashion and retail companies, and they have a ton of great companies that reside in the fashion zone and have resided there for a while. So doing it with them means that we can get a lot of people who are either can be our clients right now or might be our clients in the future, and like being able to teach them that this is the way that they need to be thinking about the awareness, like what retention marketing is, what data-driven marketing is, how can you segment your customers using data, and why it's important, and like things like this, which I believe is a big aspect of any SaaS company, any B2B company where you're doing something like you need to educate as well as you need to sell and you need to do your product.
That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, any founder, you're starting out a business, acquisition of new customers. How'd you determine the tactics and the approach that you wanted to go after? Was it, kind of internal discussion using mentors, hiring folks? Is it kind of an agile test approach? I mean, that's always the big, like, oh, we've got to acquire customers. And I'm just more interested in like how you came to the path that you're headed down.
So what I realized was that during some of the sales calls, the initial sales calls that we had, especially when we ramped up and we had the first version of the product, like I'm not talking about the Excel spreadsheets and like Google Data Studio dashboards, when we actually built that front end for the first time and things like this, and we had those sales calls. One of the things that I realized was that clients have very, very varying degrees of knowledge on what data can do for you. And I think that's partially because everyone understands that data is the future and data is important because they see in the news, they see the examples of how other companies are using it, but their personal interaction with it and their personal knowledge with it might not be that deep. And it was something that a mentor of mine said, because that made me think about this quite a bit, because we had a few calls with someone who I think was like more polite rather than she didn't want to, she was saying, yeah, maybe type of thing, which is another problem as doing sales as a founder. You need to understand which one is like a polite no, which maybe is a polite no. But when I was discussing that whole interaction with one of my mentors, actually at the Fashion Zone at the time, she mentioned, she was just like, are you sure that she understands what your product does? And when she said that, I at first I was just like, yes, of course she does. Like I explained it to her, and then I was just like, I don't know if she does. And like that sort of stuck with me for like a week of me like just sort of like thinking about what does it mean. And then I talked to someone else, and they said like, well, listen, like you like because like we started going into September when exactly that was happening, that like everyone knew that the second wave is coming, that it's imminent, and everyone was just trying to like get on the bandwagon and get their fulfillment and everything else in place for the Black Friday and like Cyber Monday and like everything else. So at that time, I was just like thinking like maybe there's a way for me to educate. So I did the first iteration of just like putting like as simple as just like putting like all my thoughts on paper. And then that ended up being a 30-slide deck. And then I called up the Fashion Zone. Actually, they were the first ones that I did that with. And I was just like, do you think that would be interesting? And they said, you know what, that will be interesting. Yes, we'll do it. We'll put you in the schedule. And they did. And it was extremely well attended. Like we had, I think like 60 or 70 companies register, and like half of them attended, despite it being on an extremely short notice. Like it was like a 10-day before type of thing. And 10 days before the event, like that's when we started advertising or doing anything with it. And because it was so well attended and we had so many questions come in and people really loved it, and people were talking about how they really liked it and they appreciated it, and that we had so much follow-up emails after this about the questions, what else they should do, what else they should consider, and things like this, which made us realize that we probably need to spend more time on this. So I ended up honing that deck together. Like we had a mentor who helped, actually another mentor who does a lot of like those type of sales and educational documented things, who like basically helped us trim the content, and then at the same trim the deck, I guess, a little bit, but like put more content in a more digestible manner, like figuring out what type of examples work, what type of examples don't work, where do you need to make those, like extra pauses to make sure that everyone like got what you were talking about, and like things like this, and making it in the best way possible. That was that moment where we like realized we really needed that. I don't know if that answers your question. I feel like it's a lot of like a big story of how those happened.
Yeah, but I think a point that you made that I think is so important that I just really want to hit on it is, I think people overestimate the knowledge of their target audience, like always, because you're so steeped in it and you understand it and you live it and think about it, that, you go out and kind of make these assumptions like, oh, someone's going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Or, I really think that's a massive mistake that companies make, not just startups and software companies, but everybody, of making these assumptions that someone understands what the hell they're talking about.
And definitely, I think that was that moment. It was just such a big, aha moment when my mentor said that. She was just like, are you sure she understands what you're talking about? And like, she's like, yes, she must be. And like that whole like conversation, like thinking back, was like one of those key moments, like realizing that we need more educational content. We need more of and we did some. So that's why it's also like, I realized that maybe like what we did wasn't good enough for those type of people, because we started doing some white papers. But white papers are very different from like being able to, like the webinar where someone can unmute themselves and ask a question, is a very different format from reading a document that might also be a little bit, a step too far into the knowledge as well. So doing those things, I feel like as an early stage startup it also helped organize the thoughts quite a lot.
Kind of also, it ties into it a little bit, but I'm also interested in always like how people come up with their model and pricing. I think that's a struggle point is, do you sell monthly or annually? Do you do it by user? Is it custom? And then, what do you actually make the dollar amount? How did you guys go about that type of thinking?
So I think for us, the easier point on that was that, well, there were a combination of two. We talked to the clients what they think they would have paid, which is a very interesting conversation, because you never know how sincere they are, because obviously they wanted a little bit cheaper. But there were also some times when we were like, okay, we're going to be charging this. And the person that we were talking to was just like, yeah, we'll do that. We'll put we'll pay more. And it was just like, very interesting. She's like, we're like probably undercharging slightly for the service that we're providing. And like, that's like, I guess like it's a combination of these things. And what we did was have our lawyers draft up the contracts so that anyone, like, we're able to change our pricing at any time that we want, and we're going to be giving the courtesy pricing. So like that's one of those things that we're doing at the moment. The easier thing was, the few interesting things about pricing that happened with us was that one, it was we just copied, like, because we at some point we decided that we are doing the, like, Shopify clients would be our primary customers for now and would be our target customers for now. We looked at what other companies like us in Shopify did and how they charged, what they charged for, and things like this. So like that was a big thing that, so like that's where we just decided to take overall, being like, okay, this is going to be on a monthly basis. It's going to be a subscription. It's going to be paid on a monthly basis. We're not going to take any upfront fees, and then it's going to be based on the number of customers those clients of ours have, because that obviously determines the cloud size and how much data we're storing for them and things like this. On the other side of things, one of the things that we're constantly doing and things like this is like there's this rule with like that you should be bringing in like at least 10 times the value that you're charging. So that's something that we're constantly looking at as well, being able to like compare that. It's like, are we bringing in the value if that price is this on a monthly basis? Like, does it still make sense? So that's one of the things that we've looked at as well. And the other thing that we did was being able to just some conversations, because like there was some things that we were like thinking about and testing out, like to test out or like to do, where it was sort of like per like recommendation fee or per like this like output fee, where like the fee would be different on a monthly basis. One of the things that we were like, while we might consider that in the future, like one of our early stage customers was just like, I hate this. And they just like, they were like so passionate about how much they hate that. And it makes sense to me as a business owner why they hate that. They can never estimate how much money they're owing to that company on a monthly basis. Like they need to like, their budget, their financial team needs to be flexible about it. They need to like, on a monthly basis, apparently they talk to their finance team being like, well, I know that this costed that much, but we brought in that much revenue, but really like we didn't budget for this. So like it's an interesting thing where you need to like think about the business a little bit and like how that works as well.
Yeah, it's great.
So Fatima, what are the big goals for the business over the next, let's say, 5 years? Where do you see you guys going? Where are you setting the bar for yourself?
Yeah, so we want to be a customer data platform of choice for retail companies. So we want to be growing, obviously, outside of Shopify ecosystem. We're currently talking to a number of companies that use other e-commerce platforms or POS systems as well, and trying to integrate ourselves into some of those ecosystems too. So like the big goal for the 5 years is being able to collect all of that customer data in one spot for our customers, so they can know everything about how, when, and like how do you predict all those things at the same time as well.
Is there any like catalyst that you think is going to help you turn it on faster, whether that's acquiring a certain type of customer, a change in the marketplace, certain features in the product? Is there something that you see ahead as a true catalyst to drive forward?
I think that it's an interesting one. Like definitely there are features, like I think it's all interconnected, right? Like your product needs to evolve because otherwise your competitors can be catching up, and you need to be changing those things. I think the biggest catalyst is probably the competition itself. One of the things that happened because of the pandemic is that everyone is just overwhelming everyone with their emails, with their SMS, with everything, all of the channels, how they can contact the customers. Like you feel like I feel like the general, it's not just a feel, it's a statistical thing as well. Like people started receiving, like, I think 4 to 5 times more communications from retailers than they have before. But you are one person, like every person, like there's only so much information you can retain. There's so many emails you can read. There's so many communications that you can follow up on. And like, obviously, your spending has stayed the same or probably even decreased in the last year for most people. So I think that standing out is very important. And that's something that we tell our customers, that we can help you stand out in this. We can help you navigate that customer base and navigate that competition much better than you could before.
How do you look at competitors? Are you very competitive? Is it something that you're obsessed with? What are they doing? And, what feature set do they have? Or there's some folks that are the ignore it. We've got our vision. We know what we want. We're going to go forward, and who cares what the other folks are doing in the market?
So we did some research. I would say that no one is obsessing over it at our company, because we feel like we've got exactly what you're saying. We've got our vision. We think that we're doing it differently than others. We are doing it differently than others in the competition, in the competitive space. We're thinking that we can do it better long term and amongst like a wider range of companies as well, which is what part of it is. Like you need to build what you believe is the best at some point, because it might not be the best for everyone, but if it's the best for most people in your target group, that's the goal, right? You don't want to build the copy, because a lot of the other solutions in the space are pretty much like they all have the same, some of the same sets of features, and some of that we have too, but the core is different, which is like why I also try not to look at it too much, because I know that like, yeah, they can get it for like that much money, like they can go there, but building something that is completely new and different and requires an educational aspect a little bit is something that we have a goal of, and that's how we're changing it, at least for us.
That's great. So, the question that I always like to kind of wrap up around is, let's imagine that you were able to go back in the past to 5 or 6 months before you decide to go on this endeavor and start the business and have coffee with yourself. What is some advice that you would give yourself about the future and what you're about to embark on?
That's an interesting question. I think, I don't know. So like, it's a very, I've had a lot of thoughts about whether if in September 2019, when we started the company, if we could foresee the pandemic, would I start the business or not? And that was the question that I've asked myself a few times, because that was something that recently was asked of me. But even like during when things were happening, I was sometimes thinking about it, like, wasn't I better off, having a great job at a great company that was a lot more established, and like things like this. And I think the answer is that I would have done it anyway, even if I knew that was happening. What I probably the advice that I would have given myself is to be a little bit more, I think, forward and a little bit more confident in some of the things that I was doing and exploring, because it's important, and it's important to move sometimes a little faster. And I feel like when you don't exactly know what you're doing, and I think that was probably the problem. The biggest problem was that we didn't know what we were doing exactly. We knew that we wanted to do something in this big intersection of retail, marketing, and data, but there's so much to do even in the intersection of all of these things that it was just a little bit difficult of navigating, like how exactly do you do all of that. And I think that like moving a little bit faster in some of the ideas that we had was super, would probably like speed it up a little bit more, but I don't even know if it would be that much, to be honest, because we were still figuring out things. So like, I guess being confident in what you're doing is the biggest thing that I would have said myself.
It's pretty interesting. I think as I've asked that question, that is a common theme is, be confident in what you're doing, go for the risk. And I think even that summary of life is short, go after it. And it's so interesting because we're talking to entrepreneurs and people that start business. And from the outside, I think most people would think they're confident and that they're, not afraid of risk. But every time we go back and talk about advice, it's about more confidence, don't be afraid to go forward, all of that type of stuff.
Well, I think it's natural to be scared, right, of something that you don't know, of unknown and things like this, of unpredictable. So I feel like even though entrepreneurs are probably like people who start companies are confident, they're still human at the end of the day. So it still makes sense for them to be like a little bit scared and a little bit unsure about where something is going.
Yeah, for sure. So Fatima, thank you so much for your time today. For our audience, if they want to find out more about you, more about Veer AI, where should they go?
Veer AI, it also has links to our LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and other accounts. You can find us on any of those social media, and you can reach out to the team if you want to know a little bit more about the product and what we do, and if we can help you or someone you know. info@veer.ai is the best way to reach us.
Awesome.
Form on the website.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
For having you today.
Had a pleasure chatting with
Thank
you.
you so much, and looking forward to see the business keep growing.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.